Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, my guest today on the Wisdom of is Lindsay Davis, and she's the founder and CEO of FemTech Association for Asia. It's the region's first and largest FemTech network. We're going to find out what a FemTech network is, but it spans 80 plus companies across 10 countries. So the scope and range and complexity is significant as an ecosystem. Lindsay is a former global expansion leader at Quintessentially, which is one of the world's leading premium brand management companies. And she's now championing accessible, affordable healthcare for women. And that's partnering with corporates, governments, and the UN to drive systemic change. And Lindsay, I suspect the agendas from everybody are different. And I suspect there's lots of complexity in making this happen. And I'm really looking forward to kind of unpacking this with you and tapping into the breadth of your experience as you've done this.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I think you say it best when you say basically anything worth doing is never going to be easy. That can be a podcast or that can be setting up FemTech Association Asia, Simon. So thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get into it today.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, you've had a really interesting career journey. And I generally start this conversation with, the career pivot moment. I mean, you're working with one of the leading, high-end brand management companies in the world. And I know you opened in countries for them and things, so a lot going on. And this then seems like a career pivot. What are some of what's the career pivot moment for you that actually set you down this path?
So I think I'll go all the way back to university. So I'm originally from the US, as you can tell by this accent, but I am British American, and I'll explain to you how I got there. So basically started in the US and found that I loved languages. I loved the fact that you can connect with so many people. So I studied Spanish language and government, was very interested in politics and media. Which Lord knows nowadays it's easy to get involved in that and see the impact of media on politics and the world at large. So anyways, from there, graduated, moved into the comms space. So I was in the agency world for a number of years. I knew I wanted to move client side, but actually before moving client side, I actually moved across the pond. So I moved to the UK. I moved to London from the US, spent about 14 years there, became a British citizen, moved from the agency side to the client side. So I had always worked on the agency side in premium brands and luxury brands, I think just by coincidence. But in time, that's where I kind of built my expertise. So when I moved to the client side, I moved to a company called Quintessentially, headquartered in London, and worked in the luxury space or lifestyle services space. So from there, I was able to run a global division as managing director of their franchises. So was able to launch offices in over 20 countries and ran a global network of over 60 countries. So really fantastic opportunity to build an international career. About 6 years ago, just in time for COVID, in January of 2020, I moved to Singapore. So that's kind of the third time, I guess, you could say I've started my career, once out of university, once in the UK, then completely pivoted again here in Asia, where I've done business before and I thought I understood, but now living here, I realize, the cultural nuance and the depth of these beautiful cultures here is a really great opportunity to further expand my career. So I've been here about 6 years now and launched FemTech Association Asia in October of 2021.
Sure. I mean, we have multiple clients in Singapore, and I've been up there speaking and things like that. Beautiful place, and it lived through an interesting time during COVID. So that was almost a fascinating time to have moved there right at that moment. It was it was a weird time in the world. Let's get some definitions in place. Let's understand what femtech actually is. That term. I know you discovered the term and it launched you into a pathway. Femtech. What does that mean?
Sure. So when we think of femtech, we can break it down into female technology. So with that, we're looking at any type of medical devices, digital apps, software, products, whatever it may be that specifically looks at improving women's health through technology solutions.
Mm.
So, it really is a range of categories, everything from, menstruation all the way through to menopause and beyond, which we're now seeing longevity, a big trend in women's health.
Yeah.
So the term femtech was coined around 2015, 2016 by Ida Tin, and we're continuing to see a lot of progress in the market with organizations like McKinsey and Bain and more writing studies on the femtech industry. So it was kind of a fortuitous time to get into the industry that we hadn't really seen that growth here in Asia or that attend looking at kind of that industry. So that's kind of where I came in and saw that gap and started this organization.
Absolutely. And so let's just, I mean, you've created this ecosystem, which is FemTech Association Asia, and we'll get into that in a minute. But can we just talk about women's health for a little bit? I mean, there might be some listeners to the podcast going, well, what do you mean women's health? Isn't it just technology for health? But, we know increasingly, and I've done a fair bit of consulting work in the health sector, we know that increasingly the more specific health solutions and offerings are to the individual, the better they are, let alone to male versus female. So can we just talk about women's health for a little bit and some of the challenges and some of the, it's clearly it's a mission for you as well. And then specifically women's health in Asia. I'd love you to kind of unpack that for us a little bit.
Sure. So maybe we can start with our vision as an organization, which is we are on really the path or the vision. We want to see available, accessible, and affordable healthcare for all women in Asia. And we really see technology and an ecosystem or a
Yeah.
community as the channels to achieve that. When we talk about women's health, we of course have, the biological differences of women's health, what's on our insides, of course. But we also see that women's health can be looked at from the how it differently impacts women, like cardiovascular disease, or how it disproportionately impacts women, like a lot of autoimmune issues. So really, women's health, when we talk about it, has historically been thought of as bikini medicine for the areas on the body it covers. But actually, women's health and it needs to be considered as so much more holistic, from brain health to stress to sleep, and everything in between. And we've also seen historically that kind of reproductive age is where we've seen the most care. But now that really is expanding through women's entire life cycles from, kind of early stage puberty all the way through to end of life. And so it's really looking at that whole health life cycle for women and realizing that we aren't built the same. That
No.
up until, around 1993, there wasn't even really testing done on women's bodies. So we don't even have the research. We could add even another layer on that of here in Asia, we hadn't had a lot of research previously for women in Asia. It would typically we look at US data, which isn't going to be the same. So this is really where we're seeing a lot of positive growth and change in that we are actually creating a regional ecosystem with regional research, regional founders, regional companies, and a regional network that's focused on our market rather than, maybe solutions that aren't localized to what we need here, to what we need here in market.
Yeah. I mean, when I was preparing for the podcast, this stat, I think from Accenture, women's health accounts for only 4% of overall R&D funding globally. That's a staggering statistic. That is,
Yes.
is it, is that commercially driven? I mean, that doesn't make sense. Is it commercially driven? Is it something else?
Sure. I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons, and I think some of it just starts in, we can refer to Caroline Criado Perez, who wrote a book called Invisible Women, and
Yeah.
it discusses the concept or the theory of, and actually proves it as well, of the world being built for the male default or with the male bias. So the whole idea is if we look at the history of medicine, maybe what hasn't taken women into account, hasn't prioritized women, or has looked at women just again, as I mentioned earlier, through that reproductive care, but not really before or after that.
Mm.
So, I think when we talk about that investment, I think maybe it just hasn't been front of mind. We also know that there's a bias even for getting healthcare. There's a bias in fundraising just for female founders in general. And what we do see is, yes, of course, there are male founders in our industry, and we love our male founders here in Asia. We have about 17% in FemTech Association Asia, which is just awesome. The men making pregnancy devices or microbiome testing, all of these really exciting things. We do want to make sure ultimately that we're, being inclusive in the space, but we haven't seen that investment. So women's health has historically been under-researched, underfunded, and underserved. And that's really what we're trying to pivot moving forward, and obviously focusing on Asia as the region, mainly because I'm based here and I'm passionate about this region. I absolutely love it.
Sure. And, it's a great lesson for anyone that wants to start something. And you talk about going from the margins to the mainstream. And if you are the entity, the person, the founder, the organization that moves something from margins to mainstream, there's tremendous opportunity in that. If you just enter mainstream, you're competing against mainstream, if you like. And I'm a lot of people say everything that can be done has been done, and that's simply not true. And there's still a lot of margins in the world, that people could be playing in. But, women's health has been the pathway for you. And so you have built FemTech, the FemTech Association, for this. What would you say is the key to, I'll come back to the stakeholder question in a minute. I want to explore the United Nations experience for a little bit. I mean, not everybody gets a phone call from the United Nations saying, we need you, we want to have a conversation and talk about that. Tell us that, unpack that little process for you. You'd obviously created enough noise in the market with what you were doing that you got the call from the United Nations.
I think, first of all, I'd love to say that my husband would agree with you. I do cause enough noise and create enough noise. I think when it comes to the UN, they were a really strong partner right from the start. So we looked at the UN ESCAP, which is all about catalyzing growth through entrepreneurship. And specifically, they saw the trend in women's health and femtech. So they actually reached out to me, seeing the work that I was doing early on, Sarah Danzio and Elena. And the two of them absolutely have been massive supports, inviting us to the Feminist Finance Forum 2 years in a row in Thailand, in Bangkok at the UN HQ there. And then after that, around 2003, actually commissioned myself and another researcher, Micah Steinebach, to go and actually research the industry in depth. So take a lot of the work that we had already done in FemTech Association Asia, but add on to that over 42 interviews, hours and hours of desktop research and reports and looking through, historical research. And actually, there wasn't a lot there. The good news is that we had done a lot of the work with FemTech Association Asia, so we're able to share that knowledge through our recent research paper that we launched in December of 2025 in partnership. And we've just seen a lot of interest grow from there. And it really is like a light bulb. So I have to say, from the UN perspective, they've been such a fantastic partner. Furthermore, I can touch on the UN FPA, which is all about reproductive and sexual health, and looking at their Equity Alliance, which is all about bringing in gender health equity. So bringing together this large, global community that we can all connect and collaborate to advance faster. Because, as they say, if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go faster and further, you go with more, right? All together. So I think the idea is that the UN's been a huge supporter and really seeing the gap in not only healthcare, but in women's entrepreneurship as well. So very grateful for them as a partner.
And so when you're bringing so many stakeholders into a story, what's been your go-to strategy to create alignment across very different stakeholder groups? You've got founders and investors and government and NGOs and the UN, and they all have an agenda, and everyone would rather their agenda was the primary agenda. I mean, those of us that have worked in stakeholder engagement understand the nuances, but this is true for everybody that's trying to create something. Everybody wants a piece. What's been your go-to strategy or thought process or methodology to really pull stakeholders together?
That's a really great question. And we do that according to our pillars. So we have four, well, and kind of a fifth, which is our specialist advisory pillar, where we
Mhm.
advise startups coming to the space, corporates who are interested in the space. We also support companies going out of Asia and into other markets. I was in Japan just this past week and looking at what's happening there and speaking at a conference there. So it's exciting to see these relationships. But the four that I would like to talk about are one, thought leadership. So our
Mhm.
research, our white papers that we write, our trends that we spot, our investor lists, really trying to create value through research.
Yeah.
And so the UN, for instance, fell under that research partnership. Secondly, we can look at our programming and events. So we start with thought leadership, we go into programming and events. Of course, we have smaller online forums like this week. This past week, I contributed to a research partner of ours, Milu Insight, and discussed safety in different capital cities in Southeast Asia and how that impacts women's health and
Yeah.
women's earning potential and income levels. So, we do see some variation around what those partnerships can fulfill. So programming is very important to us. We even ran the first and largest women's health conference in Singapore in 2024, and it really hadn't been done before. So we're really proud of that homegrown work. So we have thought leadership, our programming, our amplification. So it's making sure we're working with the media, that we're putting out, data points that are accurate about Asia. So often when we see femtech, we see again a Western view or a Western take because our market isn't as developed yet. But however, we want to make sure that we're representing Asia accurately with
Yeah.
the industry processes. And then finally, as you mentioned, stakeholders, we're looking at community building. So it's across the board, as you mentioned, founders, investors, accelerators, even consumers and enthusiasts who get involved in what we're doing just because they're really passionate about women's health. So I think with these four pillars of thought leadership, programming, amplification, and community building, we have a very clear view on what our purpose is in the market. And the first and foremost focus is supporting the founders with their growth. And
Right.
so that's really, how we've targeted it through our vision, those pillars, and knowing that our target audience is supporting founders first and
Okay.
foremost.
So let's, if you're happy to play for a little bit, let's build the femtech model and create the picture of what femtech is. And
Great.
so it starts with founders for you. And we had a chat and you were talking about circles and things, but if we place founders, and I might represent this differently to how you are holding it in your head, and that's okay because you can just say, Simon, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense.
No, I doubt it. I doubt it. It'll be great.
But so it starts with founders. Just articulate why founders are actually the starting point for FemTech Association.
So, one of the biggest challenges of women's health is the education awareness, stigma, taboo, and empowerment, if we look at all of those different points. So, that really localized, personal, individual, really relatable startup
Yeah, yeah,
makes a lot of impact. We
yeah.
do see, however, a real pivot from the B2C focus, which is quite hard to grow, to a B2B focus for scale. So we do find our corporate partners, our insurers, to be, as channels for the B2B2C to be very important for us. In addition, some of these founders are building social enterprises. So it really is a ground up movement. And what we see is governments are amazing. These large scale corporates are amazing, big pharma, amazing, and all part of the ecosystem. But these founders have the ability to move faster and to really focus on the problems that they see day in, day out as female founders who themselves have experienced many of these issues.
Perfect. So I'm seeing a couple of guardrails. You've spoken several times. You actually said there were two things. You said there's the technology, and in a prior chat you talked about the tools, but we can make this happen through better technology to give accessibility. It obviously drives a more cost-effective set of solutions, but you've spoken several times about the community and the ecosystem. If this is an expansive view, trying to reach more and more people, if the B2C is at the top, I guess we can put consumers at the top. What is the B2B piece in the middle?
Sure. When we're talking about B2B, we're looking at other channels for partnerships and or for revenue generation. So
Right.
these could be, for instance, working with corporates to be a part of their employee wellness programs. These could be working with governments to create, new partnerships for women's health access through some of the companies that these founders develop. This could be academic institutions that are looking to have research partners. So it's
Yeah.
all of these different ways of looking at how we can partner in the market.
Interesting. And so these are effectively interface organizations.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, perfect. And then, so you don't go direct to consumer initially. You do always operate through these interface organizations?
So I only go B2B or, for the B2B to C. Our founders are the ones who ultimately are talking with the consumers. So for me, I'm creating an industry body, the industry awareness, the industry collaboration, the industry partnerships. Our founders hopefully will benefit from that by ultimately coming around using our network to build the partnerships or the revenue channels that meet consumer needs. And that's exactly what you've drawn here.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Whenever you draw concentric circles, geometry matters. And whenever you draw concentric circles or an expanding model, there are some natural breakpoints in there at the top of each circle. What you've created at this level is an industry. By the time you work through the founders and the interface organizations, you've actually created a consumer-facing industry. Is that a fair statement?
I think it is, especially based on the passion and the gaps that women have where they just don't have solutions. So I think there's a real demand.
Yeah. And what have you created where the line just sits above the founders? So you start with the founders. What is it that the FemTech Association has created by finding the founders that have something they believe they can do? You've created an industry by bringing the ecosystem and technology to the table. That's B2C facing. But what have you created through FemTech Association at the founder level before they got access to the interface organizations and it became an industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about this, we're talking about connectivity. And what do I mean by that? Before we had FemTech Association Asia, there wasn't a central place that brought together all the founders. So they didn't even all talk to each other or know each other. Now we have this fantastic platform, a lot of a very lively WhatsApp chat, and people connecting through meeting each other in the organization to really build momentum through founder to founder, peer to peer mentorship, and also being able to help each other. So, for instance, today I received a really exciting invite to, a VIP event to meet the founder of a massive tech company. And I was able to put that out to the group and say, hey, I have a +1. Does anyone want to join me? So what a great opportunity to continue to kind of pay it forward through the efforts that we have. And what I will share about FemTech is it is by far the most collaborative and generous and kind industry I've ever worked in my entire life. It's really people who want to see others succeed in the space. So it does have a bit of a passion or an emotion tied to it as well, that women's health feels very personal.
Fantastic. In gratitude of you doing this episode with me, would it be okay if I tried to sell FemTech back to you in a way that helps people to understand it? I mean, the power of a model is actually in use in the choreography of it. I mean, if I was positioning FemTech for somebody who could be involved, I might be saying, FemTech is really about providing access for women in Asia to the full range of health needs, from cradle to grave or, whatever that language might be. And so FemTech Association realised that has to start with the founders. It has to start with creating ecosystem connection for founders and seeing the technology and tools founders want to bring to the marketplace and giving them connection, peer-to-peer founder network. But FemTech Association Asia can't just sit at the founder level. What we actually have to do is create an industry, because it's an industry that needs to be consumer facing and create this accessibility. So our action always has been to build the ecosystem and the community around it through partners and stakeholders, and also drive revenue and opportunity through technology and tools and the things that can be brought to market through the various interface organizations, government agencies, NGOs, regulators, I'm guessing off the top of my head now. And there's actually a place to play for everyone in this. This is perhaps one of the most generous industries that you're likely to see. And so FemTech Association Asia is really chasing this massive goal at the top to address the entire market, but build an industry underneath. And somewhere in that model is a place to play for the right stakeholders and the right people. As I play that back, does that sound like FemTech Association Asia?
I think it sounds great, Simon. I think it sounds spot on and exactly what we're trying to do. Ultimately, the one piece here that we're looking at is also, and I didn't talk about this, the one piece that we will add on to this eventually is how are we creating for those who can't afford, these solutions? How are we creating that, that next more philanthropic level where we're making sure that our solutions are also giving, that are social enterprises. So I get really excited when I think about that as the future. I think it is important, though, to start with, kind of the capital side to make sure that we're generating enough revenue to maintain the industry and its growth. So yes, I would agree that what you have drawn is correct. How you've explained it is correct. And from there, looking at kind of that purpose side as a future goal.
Yeah, but it might be the model might change to capital and revenue, and then philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the problems with philanthropy is people often see it as in addition to, and it's really alongside business. Great philanthropy should be alongside partnerships and revenue, not as a result of revenue or profit and in addition to. So you could almost, that interface layer is actually the magic. That's really what you've done. You've identified the magic in the interface layer, which is clever and is a lesson for everybody in business. Like you want to go to the market and you want to sell stuff. You're the founder. You have something down here worth selling. Ignore the interface layer at your own peril. And so whether your market is B2B or B2C, the interface layer is critical. I mean, I think that's super clever in terms of FemTech. I'm not sure if you're about to say something when we got onto the philanthropy piece or not.
No, not at all. I think it makes a lot of sense. What do we always battle with as any type of organization? We battle with time, resource, and funding.
Yeah,
So those are my challenges as an organization. How do I find more time? How do I find more hands? And how do I find more money to support the initiatives that
yeah.
we want to run? So ultimately, those are our challenges. But you know what? I welcome the challenge. Like we said at the beginning, if it's not challenging, it's not worth doing or it's already been done. So, to each challenge, I say, let's do it. I embrace the challenge.
Certainly. So let's get into some business thinking, if you
Yeah.
like. You've operated across multiple regions, different cultures, different languages. You have an interest in language, but if someone was going to launch a division of their company in another country, and it's not similar to their country, what have you learned about launching brand product into an entirely different country, culture, language? What are the key lessons you've got out of that?
Well, obviously, the first thing I'm going to do is pitch the idea of interface organization. So this is where
Yeah,
making sure that we find the right networks to connect with. I think individuals are important to connect with as well, but to accelerate that, I think joining organizations, any trade industry organization, I think is really positive. I think secondly, boots on the ground. I think
yeah,
when we actually talk about what's important, it's doing the hard yards and actually trying to understand the market, making sure that we understand the culture. And I also think it's really important to have brand ambassadors. And I think that's especially important in Asia when coming in. And of course, I sit here and very aware of what I look like. I'm also 6 foot tall blonde lady, right, with this accent. So I have to say, I do think there's a level of making sure that we aren't kind of moving to where we shouldn't and making sure that we're leaving a local presence very much there and making sure that we are listening and learning as opposed to going in and kind of imposing ourselves. So
yeah,
something that I've really done with FemTech Association Asia is make sure that we're organization first and that we're founder first and that I, as the founder of the organization, am kind of more on the, in the back end and that I'm not as present. Now, that's not always easy to do because, again, as the voice of what's happening, the one who's doing the research, it's hard to, to not share that out of my own self. But really, that comes down to amplification pillar, where my goal is to not just say, well, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. It's actually making sure that I'm creating opportunities for others to join, and to come along and to find communications opportunities, to find business opportunities. And that's my goal, is
Yeah.
to not represent, but to support the industry in Asia.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we can overlook the need to respect the market you're entering into. And I mean, my experience has been the same. When we've entered a new country, boots on the ground is actually the fastest way, but it's slower. People want to use the internet, and can't we just do it over Zoom and everything else? But when you show a willingness to be there, you get a different level of engagement than you do if, I don't want to get on a plane. Can we just jump on Zoom and talk? And so boots on the ground. The other thing that happens when you do that, when you show up in a place, and you hinted at this when you talked about moving to Singapore, you find out a whole lot of nuances that you would never have found out if you had not physically been in the location. And it makes all the difference as you try and engage, sell, influence, and everything else. You discover stuff. And, we live in a world that's obsessed with speed and scale. And we were just having a chat prior to this recording about, maybe one of the superpowers is actually getting people to slow down just a tad in today's world and just breathe in between stimulus and response, and let the insights come. So what is you're creating change, and it's pretty big change, quite frankly. You're creating an industry, and you're pushing up against only 4% of global R&D being spent on women's health and everything else. What's your thought process and methodology around driving change that you want to see happen? You have a deep belief about it, but in change there's always resistance. So what are some of your go-to strategies been when you're bringing deep change to a market space or a sector, or a community, actually?
That's a really good question. And I think the first thing I'd say is, a question I receive a lot at events is from founders, and they say, what if I'm working with someone and they're not interested in what I'm pitching? And my thought is, well, I think for me, I like to start with low-hanging fruit. So,
Yeah.
sure, it might not be as much money or as large of a client or as big of a, scale of expansion initially. But I think the idea is that we can build momentum with those who are curious about what we are doing and who are open to what we're doing, rather than trying to explain why something is important if someone is resistant to it. So I always think, starting with the low-hanging fruit is what I look at. Now, what does low-hanging fruit look like for women's health? It might be looking at March, International Women's Month, and saying, what can we do this month? This is a great month to reach out to people. Of course, we don't want women's health to be token and just thought of in March, but if that's an entry point, we take it. If we look at maybe smaller partnerships initially starting that are helping to really just share about the industry and the landscape. So starting with education as opposed to an investment in tech. Maybe it is
Yeah.
that building up that relationship through content and talks and discussions. And I think relationships are incredibly important. I know through the Middle East, obviously in Asia. So it's really making sure we care for our relationships as well. So it's making sure that we aren't just reaching out to someone one time and saying, this is what I'm selling, this is it, which I know in the US is a bit more, kind of our modus operandi. But I think here it really is about looking at long-term relationships. And I had a lovely person I was on a phone call with once, and we really liked each other. We loved what the other one was doing, but we couldn't figure out how to partner. And the person said the most brilliant thing. They said, great, then this is a relationship for the future. Like, as in, I love it. We'll keep in touch and find a way to work together. So not everything has to be now. So it really is about planting seeds. So I would say it's starting small. It's working with those who believe in what you're doing or are curious about what you are doing. And it's looking at maintaining the relationships for the long term. I think those are some of the things I think about, because the reality is, waves start small, right? So it's, we're not just going to be that huge, big surfing wave, to speak to some Australians, I should talk about surfing, right? So, I just see that as kind of a nice starting point, is to say, let's just keep the momentum, and it's all about continuous action.
Yeah. And I certainly, I've spent a lot of time in the change management space. And one of the things that I see happening often, at the peril of the change that is, being attempted to be created is to focus on the resistance to the change and, burn all your energy and focus in trying to convert the resistance to the change as opposed to influencing the ones that are already in motion and moving with you. I mean, the word influence comes from the word fleur, which means flow. So the word influence means in flow, not pushing against. So once again, it's the wave. And I think people can make a lot of distance quickly if you don't concern yourself too much about where the resistance is and just find where the flow is and actually go to that. You spoke a little bit about, investment and investors and things like that. What have you learned about, if we can use the word pitching, those interface organizations that you want to partner with? Some of them are investors, some of them are agencies, but they're all investing something. They might not be investing capital or money. They could be investing the social license to operate, government acceptance, for example. What have you learned about pitching to people that you want to invest something in this thing?
Gosh, Simon, you have really great questions. I think when we're looking at pitching, the first thing is why, and my friend Alice said this at an event in Tokyo this past week where we were sitting on a panel together. She said, we always want to share why we are the best person or organization or company to solve this problem. Not that, oh, this is a big problem. It's why are we the best ones to solve this?
Yeah.
Secondly, of course, we want to be problem focused, not product focused. And I'll use an example of I was mentoring a really great co-founder team, and they were talking, they had an idea. They're like, this is the problem. This is what we're going after. We know our market well. I said, fantastic. A week later, they came back to me and the presentation was completely different. And I thought, well, why is this presentation completely different? Did they find something new? And they said, oh, no, we talked with one investor and he, keep in mind, this is FemTech, he, who has never invested in women's health or FemTech before, said that we need to really just focus on AI. And I just thought, if we are building for investors, that's not the problem, right? The problem is we are building for a problem it is a problem because we are building for the problem of the consumer or the business or whatever we're building for. So it's kind of also knowing our audience of who we're building for and making sure we stay true to what we believe is the actual problem of the business. And then finally, I think it's also being really clear on what's the revenue opportunity, what's the commercial opportunity. Investors want to make money. They're not there just to learn. So, at the end of the day, it's making sure we're very clear that why we're the ones they should invest in, that it's problem focused and it's a real problem that's out there. And then 3, that there's a real revenue opportunity for this untapped market that we believe, or disruptive market that we believe that we're solving. So I'd say those are maybe 2 things.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting thing. Investors are interested in the ROI, which often doesn't represent the problem well. And investors either want revenue or reputation.
Sure.
Sometimes your investors aren't people that are going to get revenue out of it, but they want to be held in a higher level because they were a part of it, and certainly that's true for philanthropists. They're not going to get a return out of this, but they are going to get a reputational return. And you need to be able to position this for investors in language that matches them. It's interesting. One of the things that you talked about was they need to know why we are the best people to do this. And in recent times, I've been pushing back a little bit on the whole idea about start with why and find your why. It's super important to have a purpose, but investors in the marketplace find their sense of safety in your how. They find their sense of safety knowing that you are the best opportunity. You're better at this than everybody else. How you do this is worth placing investment in. Why you do it tells us you're a good person, you're good people, but we find our safety in knowing that you're more likely to get this done than anybody else. And that's an art form to be able to express that without it, as you say, dropping into a product discussion. Certainly fascinating. We may as well tick all the big subjects while we're on this, right? So let's dive into innovation. You're creating a disruptive industry, actually. I mean, if I've understood this correctly, you're not even disrupting an existing industry. You've created an industry that is disruptive. So that's innovation at its finest. And I think one of the things that a lot of people think is that innovation's a bolt out of the blue of an idea and let's roll. I think innovation's much more considered and thought through than that. And it's interesting, one of your pillars is thought leadership.
Mhm.
Um, Unpack your thinking about innovation for me a little bit, please.
So I agree with you, Simon, in what you just said. I think so often when we hear innovation, people are thinking about these big, huge ideas. What's this game changer and disruptor and these big words? Innovation is every day.
Mm.
Innovation is how we run our operations. Innovation is how we manage our teams. It's, workforce architecture. It's all of these things. So I think, first of all, I like to think of innovation as not just related to technology, but innovation in our leadership, innovation in, how we communicate, all of these different things. And I think even seeing you so strongly focused on visuals in your consulting and advisory, I think that's innovation. It's bringing another
Mm.
angle and another lens to bring creativity in. So innovation, first of all, I believe is, omnipresent. So when it comes to femtech, and when I think of innovation in our industry, I feel like our role as FemTech Association Asia is to bring the innovations that are created by the founders to market. So, for instance, we run something called the FemTech Innovation Showcase, where for different corporate partners or different governments or different events and conferences, we actually go to those conferences with a plethora of solutions, products, services that are all femtech. We set up kind of small stations where people can walk around and actually touch the product, feel the product, understand the product, use the product, tap on the product, try on the product, whatever it may be is that solution. And you just really see that appreciation when people can put something in their hands and actually touch it. And it almost allows that innovation to connect further. And maybe this goes back to your point earlier around slowing down,
Mm.
around actually, being in person and building the relationships in person. Maybe all I'm doing is aging myself, Simon, but I really do believe so much of what we do, the offline impact of being able to see the innovation without it just being tech led can be
Yeah.
so strong. And I think our founders in our network are incredibly powerful and incredibly thoughtful and incredibly innovative because they're having to find ways to do everything from not only their actual product or technology, but actually be creative with how they're approaching, social media bans or not being able to use certain words on social media that are women's anatomy. You're not allowed to use certain words. So they really have to be creative and innovative, even how they approach their marketing. They
Yeah.
have to be innovative about how they talk to their consumers to make sure it's an inclusive space. So there are so many layers to innovation.
And, it's interesting. Invention only becomes innovation when it's used. And so I can invent something, but if no one actually uses it, it's not an innovation. And humans are analog beings living in a digital world. Um, I draw deliberately because a PowerPoint slide is a digital experience. Click, 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 right? When you draw people in. And drawing is analog. And we are still actually analog beings living in a digital world. And we do want to pick things up and smell them and turn them over in our hands and look at them. And but invention only becomes innovation once it's being used. And so, I've got this great innovative idea. Well, you don't really. What you have is an idea.
Right, right,
But
right, right.
if you make it work and people use it, then that's an innovation, right? So it's just fascinating. I mean, I'd like to talk a little bit about, obviously one of the biggest things that's happened in our lifetime is we've had a long tail on AI, and then it burst into the worldview in November of 2022 with ChatGPT, and it's only 4 years, and it feels like we've been at it for decades, right? And I'm not going to have a debate about whether it's the greatest existential crisis to mankind or our greatest invention, but we've been hurtling towards a digitized world, both in terms of online access and then tools like AI and things like that. What do you fear we lose in healthcare? When we hurtle towards digital healthcare, telehealth, online health and everything else, as opposed to somebody seeing a person, because healthcare is always a person. There's always a person with the health. What are some of the concerns you have about healthcare hurtling towards digital healthcare?
So I am actually on the opposite end that I feel like it's a really positive thing because women have been left out for so long. And so for us, technology is really good. It's helping
Mm,
us. It's allowing us, the convenience of our homes. It's allowing us more affordable care. And I won't go into all the caregiving, disproportionate caregiving and women making less money than men, but just these are all the things in the back of my
yeah.
mind when I talk like this. So I see technology as really positive. Having said that, I am going to refer to what you just mentioned about AI. And part of our paper with the UN was discussing the risks involved in AI and making sure that we are creating, the databases, the resources that don't have bias. And
Mm,
so a lot of times if we're looking at AI as a solution, but women aren't included in that AI initial build or in the sample sets, we do have concerns. So
mm,
I think when we think about technology, I think it's really positive for healthcare, aging populations, women, rural communities for reach. All of these things are very positive. To your point, at the end of the day, what I see technology as is an indicator. And ultimately, the indicator is to, of course, go and see our medical professional. So these aren't all the diagnostics, right? These are for tracking, finding what the issues could be, and making sure that it gives us a bit more information so that we do go see our medical professional in person. So I would agree with you that that's the ultimate goal. But considering some people live 3 hours away from the nearest specialist, this just gives us one more, piece of information or tool for information that can help us before we make that 3 hour journey.
and so with the experience you have with um, founder-led companies trying to bring innovative ideas to the marketplace, often through technology, are we heading in the right direction structurally around control and ownership of the technologies and data privacy, bias, not being built into solutions and things like? I mean, is the real risk not getting it right structurally behind the technology? It's not an area that I'm involved in a lot, but I can picture a lot of things happening when you're talking about
Sure.
people's
Sure.
health, the
Yep.
misuse of data, and all of that sort of thing. Do you feel like we're heading in a good direction in that regard?
It's a great question. I think it's happening. So whether we want to or not, it's happening. Maybe on a positive note that I can give us some feelings of stability is a lot of the women, excuse me, I shouldn't say women, a lot of the femtech founders that we have are creating their own databases for their
Okay.
AI.
Yeah.
They're actually building their own very secure data confidentiality, data security, and data management plans, and really looking at the most robust security standards. Because not only, do we worry as women about, underserved, underfunded, under-resourced, and data breaches, the last thing we want is for anyone to give it an excuse to cut women's health, or to cut that out of the conversation or say, oh, it's too risky with data. We can't, afford errors. And so, a lot of what we're seeing is the slow and steady growth. And so maybe, just in summary, I do think technology is a positive thing. Of course, I worry about it. When I look at data management, I can credit the founders with this is top of mind. I mean, this is women's personal information. And we even see how maybe data is handled in other markets around reproductive care, et cetera. And it's quite frightening. So I think it is something that's of high concern with our founders here in Asia, and they make it a priority. So I have to commend them for that.
Well, which also means they're willing to go a little slower and take a beat to build their own solutions rather than going to a public large language model that
Mhm.
gives you speed, but you lose control and
Yeah.
you actually don't know where everything is. I think one of the CEOs of one of the AI platforms said we don't actually know where all the data is anymore. That's concerning.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's concerning. So it seems like your founders are just once again, we don't have to go at everything 100 miles an hour. We have to do it well, if you like.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think it's a real trend. Sorry, just building on what you're saying, Simon, that I think is absolutely correct. In the past, I'd say half of a year, the number of founders who I've chatted with who've said, you know what, I'm not really pursuing funding. If it comes to me, great, but I'm not pursuing VC funding anymore. I want to do it my way. I want to own it all. I don't want to feel pressured to build in a way that I don't feel um, is either ethical or to our strategic growth plans, or that really answers the need of the consumer. I want this to be a completely authentic, experience as a founder, and I don't want to feel that pressure. So a lot of them are looking at actually slower growth through revenue, but then they'll own their businesses all the way, which is super interesting to actually hear that it used to be about, I want to raise funds, I want to raise funds, and
Yeah.
now that's starting to pivot. So I think you're onto something with that comment.
Well, I think there's a turn um, occurring. We had an obsession with scale for the last decade. You've got to scale your company. You need to, have another capital round and pour another $4 million into this thing you're building, and then scale. And all of a sudden, you've millions and millions of dollars down the tube in investor, generated capital who all want that back. We either strip it out and sell the platform and you lose control, or we've got to start taking some shortcuts. So, the obsession with scale may not have served everybody. The obsession with rapid scale may not have served everybody in the best way. Has there been, you're clearly a leader in your space, but you've demonstrated that over the entire career that you've had so far. Has there been a leader that was a significant mentor to you, either directly or in a work role, or actually out of that? And what was the most important thing you learned from them from a leadership point of view?
Oh gosh, I have so many. I mean, my primary
Well,
contact at the
I'd like you to name them all and list them from 1 to 10.
There
So
you go. I probably could too. Do you want to
no,
keep me on the phone
don't
for
do it. I
hours?
mean, just in case
You
they're
keep me on the
listening, you
phone for
don't
hours.
have to.
I would say, the first person that comes to mind and most recently is our contact at the UN ESCAP,
Yeah,
Elena Mayer Bestings. She has been incredibly supportive, and she's all about collaboration, all about connectivity. So she really just continues. Maybe it's not a learning, but she reminds me to stay motivated and to believe in collaboration as a solution.
yeah,
The second person that comes to mind is one of my leaders at our last company, a woman by the name of Annabelle Fielding, absolutely fantastic, fantastic COO and CEO of a second company and founder herself. And she just really constantly pushed me about, business basics. Like, what do you know? How are you getting there? Strategy, strategy, strategy. And she was incredibly commercial and just really helped me stay focused on kind of that mission and ultimately the business mission, that a business, as you said, an idea is an idea, but a business is what makes money. So she's kept me very focused on ultimately commercial
yeah.
focus. And then
And
the last person that comes to mind is there's a woman named Sandra Solis, and she would laugh if she heard this because she wouldn't even remember saying this. But she taught me about always keeping my door open, because when I was first starting in advertising, I was in her office like every 5 minutes, and she was my boss. And she always, the second she saw me coming up to the window, she'd put everything aside or say, I have to call you back, put down the phone. I didn't even have to ask for her time. She always made time for me, and that just really stuck with me. So I try to do that for other people as well. Is even though I have limited time, it's okay. I have 15 minutes. I can give you 15 minutes. I'm just always trying to do the Adam Grant thing of, hopefully that psychology professor at Wharton. I really learned from him the idea of like altruism does bring me joy, and
yeah,
so I want to lead with that.
that's so interesting that it was obviously a habit that she had when
Hmm.
she saw someone coming, but you noticed all the physical behaviors first,
Hmm.
and so people are always noticing, not just what you say as a leader, but what you actually do. And they might even just be the small habitual things that you do. Put the book aside, get off the call and be ready to receive you in a welcoming way into the room, rather than you having to feel like you're pushing your way into the office. I mean, I think that's one of the best examples I've heard of someone giving, around real leadership. It's you, and this question might be for my daughters, for my adult daughters. Where have you found your courage? Because you clearly have courage, otherwise you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. Where have you found your courage? I'm not convinced that we're just automatically born with it. Where did you find your courage?
So I think I'd credit two things. My mother is an incredibly strong character, and I love that. There was just like, go do it, figure it out, like just very empowering and really pushed. She believed in women's rights and still does, and she, fights for people who need the support. So I think mom. And then the other thing is I was an athlete. I was a competitive athlete, and I have been my whole life. And so for me, you get knocked down, you stand up and you get back at it. So I think resilience comes from tough parents. She was tough on me as well, but from tough parents and also from sports. I think sports gave me a lot of courage, and it didn't occur to me that I couldn't do a lot of things until kind of later in life, once I started saying, wait a minute, how much do you make? Why am I making less than you? And starting to see things like that, that were maybe more unequal. But it took me a long time to realize that. And that's a real privilege to grow up without that feeling of bias, right? And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of that courage, I guess, is also I have a high threshold for shame. So I can do a lot of silly things. I'm happy failing. Like I really am. I mean, for me, it's you have one life. You know what? I tried. I know a lot of people who didn't try. So maybe it's not always exactly as we want it, but I tried. And so I can look back and say, hey, my best effort. So mom, sports, and of course, the low sense of shame. Just always
Yeah.
being able to
Well,
fail without much worry. Yeah.
yeah, and it is true that if we've had an influential parent,
Yeah.
that makes such a big difference. But the sports thing is interesting.
Mhm.
Sport is one of those things, and I was an ultra distance runner, and
Okay.
and
Okay. I'm
and
training
and
for my
play.
first ultra marathon
Well,
now.
there you go, there you go. And I played representative sport for Western Australia in my youth and things.
Okay.
And so,
Okay.
sport is one of those things, and there are other things that do this as well. But sport is one of those things that leads you to the edge of possibility.
Mhm.
And to go to the edge of possibility, at some point, you're going to fly without a safety net.
Mhm.
And it just incrementally steps you towards it, right? And I was having a conversation just this morning with a friend and client, a fellow called Akshay Nanavati. And Akshay does weird stuff like, I'm going to try and cross the Antarctic coast to coast because no one's ever done it. And I'm going to drag
Wow.
430-pound sled with me, and everything is with me, and all I've got is a
Wow.
satellite phone, right?
Yeah.
And he was out there for 60 days before he got the verticulitis, and they said, we've got to come and get you.
Yeah.
And he's decided that it would have been better if he started on the other coast and came back the other way. So he's not given up on it yet. But he talks a little bit about voluntary suffering. The people that go to the edge undertake voluntary suffering. Like if you train for an ultra marathon, you're going to be sore a lot of the time because you're doing long runs every week, and you come off a 30K run, a 30K training run. The next day, you got fatigue in the legs and everything else, voluntary suffering. And so sport is one of those things. And there are many other things that incrementally move you closer to the edge of possibility. And so you've built I talk about it, it's the luxury of accuracy. When you have the luxury of being accurate in the preparation, leaping off the edge doesn't feel as dangerous anymore because you've done the work behind you. And I'm just not sure that we're equipping our children with those experiences in the same way anymore. Putting a kid on a bike and letting them go down the hill and see what happens. It just where does the luxury of accuracy and preparation actually occur? So it's fascinating. And yeah, I think sport, adventure, pursuits, public speaking, get on stage, play an instrument, you
Do you
know,
know, I was watching an interview. Alex Honnold just
yeah.
climbed the tower and in Taipei. And
And
I
he
was
was
watching.
not tethered. He was not tethered. It was free climbing, wasn't
No, no. And he was saying, I think more people need to be in more highly stressful situations so that other things just don't seem as stressful. And I
it?
really loved that. And I think, again, that's what I love about sport and him being an athlete is, I love the focus it gives you. I love that we all lose, right? In sports, we have all lost. So it's
Yeah,
humbling. It's good for competition. I've made some of my best friends in the world, my best female friends in the world playing sports. I love that it's difficult. Like you said, the pain, I like that there's a pain to it because you really feel you earn it when you're done,
yeah,
And I think these are all qualities I've definitely taken in moving multiple countries around the world. It's uncomfortable, having to restart a career and restart a community and I think I like that's why a lot of what I do, I like to think it's building on things I've done before. So even though I'm moving and I had to build a whole new network here in Singapore and beyond in the region, what a gift that I get to still keep my networks in all the other places. So here I
absolutely.
am talking with you, Simon, which is amazing, right? And
Yeah,
I keep meeting these amazing people. So I think what a gift. And again, to your point, whether we're equipping the next generation, one thing I can say from women's health is that I'm very grateful for our younger generations, especially the women, pushing the envelope, starting to raise these things at work. Like, why don't we have menstrual leave? Why don't we have a nursing room in the office? Why don't we have menopause support? Why don't we have mental health support in the office? I think they're demanding the care that they deserve, and they're not taking no for an answer. They're brave in having uncomfortable conversations. So I have to say, I really appreciate younger generations when it comes to women's health. We've definitely seen the younger founders making incredible impact. So very grateful for them. Things maybe I wouldn't have been brave back in the day, but now with age, I feel much more comfortable talking about things. So
That that
kudos to them.
that layer of business founders so much more focused on the bigger picture and social contribution of business, if you like, and still from the lessons from one of your mentors, still keep a focus on the commercial though. The difference between a charity and a business is the business sustains itself. Charity's always needing handouts, and one model's better than the other. Would you be happy to answer 3 quick questions for me that are just not about the conversation, just 3 quick questions, tap into your mind. I can't imagine when you were a child or even a teenager you were thinking, yeah, when I get there I will have established FemTech Association Asia. What
I
did
think
you
it could have
picture
been 4 years ago. So yeah, I would say you're correct.
what did
Yeah.
you picture you were going to be when you were young?
When I was a kid, I dreamed of being a radiologist.
Right.
Really random, but that was my number one thing I dreamt of. So I think there's always been some fascination or curiosity towards, or just love of medicine and healing. So
At what
perhaps,
age?
oh, even when I was a kid, I mean, I was probably just a big nerd, right?
How did you even know what a radiologist was?
I don't know, these things stick with you. We studied the bones in school, and I thought bones are fascinating. And the bone marrow, I remember getting really obsessed with it, and I just couldn't like get it out of my head. Like, we're made up of cells. This is so interesting. Of course, I know nothing now, and I know how unqualified I am to, be a clinician, but gosh, what a fascinating space. So yeah, just
Sure.
reading. My parents had us reading books and playing outside until dark. Like you said, taking the bikes down the hill. I had
Yeah.
broken feet, torn MCLs, like you name it, I've had the injury, I'm sure. Concussions, like I've had it all. Yeah.
Yeah. If you knew for certain you could solve the problem, what's a problem in the world you'd love to solve today? And you knew you could solve it.
That's a great question. I would, gosh, so there's so many things I want to solve. I would say the number one thing I'd love to provide and solve is that all women have ownership and choice in their own bodies. That would be in every country, in every place around the world, in every government, every individual has complete control of their own bodies. That would be the number one thing that I would probably want to solve.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's going to take some solving, right? And so then, if you could spend a day inside, one of the big conversations that's been held historically, you're a fly on the wall. You could see the thinking, you could see the manoeuvring, you could see what was going on. What conversation would you have loved to have been a fly on the wall for? So you really knew what had happened in that conversation.
Well, I could probably go back to, the Gloria Steinem days, and I'd be really fascinated to listen in on those early conversations when feminism was just forming, specifically in the US. Obviously, originally from the US, so I have, some curiosity about the country or the history of the country. But I just think that was such an interesting time, and just the challenges that, you know, the women faced, and the men and the allies, of course, who stood by the women. And even going back further than that, suffragette movement, like to be in the room and just hear how they were approaching change, I think would be a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to recognize that the suffragette movement and women having the vote was like 1901 and 1902 or something. And it was actually Australia
So
and New Zealand.
recent. I
Yeah.
know, it's so recent. So I think those conversations about what did it really sound like when people started getting together and saying, we want the vote, or,
Mm,
we want equal rights to everyone else. I think those are all really interesting discussions, and
mm.
how powerful and emotional. I mean, I almost cry thinking about it, just what people have gone through over the years for equality. It's traumatic, and it's admirable what people have done. So I think any of these conversations would be fascinating.
We're not there. We're not there yet.
No.
but you're absolutely pushing the edge of possibility to, bring great healthcare for women in Asia, and make it accessible and make it affordable and make it representative and unbiased. And you're creating an entire disruptive industry. And so, I really appreciate you taking the time out of what I'm sure is a busy schedule to share the story of FemTech, but more importantly, your journey and the things you've learned along the way. I really, really appreciate it. So, Lindsay, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, Simon. I really appreciate you hosting us as FemTech Association Asia. So a big thank you for how thoughtful this conversation was. And also want to thank your lead producer, Isabel, for all of her hard work getting us organized today. So thank you very much to your whole team.
Yeah, we look good because she's sitting there making sure everything's working. So thank you very much.